Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dancing into Brain Health podcast. I am your host, Magda Kaczmarska. As a dance artist, I have been fascinated throughout my life by the ability of dance to transcend limitations and nuances of spoken language, to bridge connection and to nurture expression. Initially, as an immigrant who was painfully shy speaking in public, I felt this in my own experience with dance, where dancing served as a source of liberation and a nexus for shaping my identity. Over my career, working with diverse communities of older persons and people living with dementia, through dance, I've been privileged to learn from them how engaging in co-creative dance has shaped their own access to this movement-based language. As I've learned about the ways dance supports multiple domains of brain health, I've often wondered, how do dance and speech interconnect? Is it possible that dance could actually help improve or rehabilitate speech? Today, our guest is Dr. Constantina Theofanopoulou, a neuroscientist and dancer, Herbert and Neil Singer Research Assistant Professor at Rockefeller University, visiting scholar at Jameel Arts and Health Lab at New York University, and Research Associate at Emory University and the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. Dr. Theofanopoulou does research that's illuminating the complex neural circuits that are crucial for social communication. And her latest research focuses on the neural connections of speech and dance. Welcome, Constantina. I'm so excited for this conversation.
I'm really very excited to be here too, and thank you for this invitation, Magda.
I am so delighted. When I first saw you, actually, I found you on LinkedIn, and I was so enamored with this idea of connecting with somebody who is equally, well, actually, far superior to me, actually, in this connection of dance and neuroscience. To me, it's been so rare to find people who are really interested in these seemingly diametric passions. So can you share with us what drew you to this work, specifically at the intersection of dance and neuroscience? What was your path into this field? Why dance and why neuroscience?
I actually am a linguist. I studied linguistics and neurolinguistics in particular. And for a long, long time, the study of the brain was not part of the field of linguistics. The study of linguistics was more of a theoretical one, where we were studying language, as I call it phenotypically, what's happening when we're speaking. We're analyzing language itself instead of what's happening in the brain while we speak. And so when I moved on in my scientific trajectory, I realized that actually there were several laboratories that had started looking into the neural pathways of speech and what makes it possible in the brain for us to learn how to speak and to then eventually actually speak in a way that seems to be just so spontaneous and easy, although it's a very, very complex process. So what brought me to neuroscience was actually my passion for speech and for understanding the neural underpinnings of speech. And it was neuroscience that eventually brought me to the scientific investigation of dance. Because although I started from studying speech neuroscience, the neurobiology of language in humans, I actually wanted to test in my PhD a hypothesis on the real deep brain mechanisms of speech in a way that is only possible to test in great detail in animal models. And so this brought me from neuroscience of speech to the neuroscience of what we call vocal production and vocal learning in other species, which is basically this very specific ability of speech to learn and imitate very complex sounds. And so I started doing work in avian vocal learners, such as songbirds and parrots. And it was this very step to avian research that surprisingly was the one that ultimately brought the link to dance. So the link is as follows. As I was delving into the parrot literature as a PhD student, I found this information that parrots, not only are they the best vocal communicators along with humans, they're also the only species in the animal kingdom, other than humans, with truly robust evidence of being able to dance, or more simply, to entrain their movements to a beat in music. And so, realizing this link, namely that humans and parrots share both really advanced vocal production abilities and rhythm-based movement, was what sparked my thinking about a potential link between speech and dance. And of course, I have to really say that this is what brought dance to my scientific life, because it was always a part of my non-academic life since I was very little and dancing flamenco. But I was never thinking that my dancing passion outside of science would actually enter into my scientific and academic life. But the link that made this possible was surprisingly so through the parrots.
I think that's fascinating. And what it instantly pops to mind, and maybe some of our listeners have seen these on Instagram, these images of parrots dancing, and they've got this really great glide. And there's some really amazing choreographers who have um, essentially applied this into dances on their human forms. So I'm not surprised that you mentioned this, but but I am also surprised. What an interesting journey. I would never have considered that the path into our understanding and kind of appreciation of the role of dance in speech has actually stemmed from birds and specifically parrots. So that's fascinating. I've kind of answered what my second question was going to be, which was what inspired you in this interest. Um, but can you explain to us a little bit of how speech operates in our brain? Being a part of the Global Brain Health Institute, I've connected with some folks who study speech, and I didn't realize how complex it is. Um, so I know that it would take a heck of a lot of time to really get into the minutia, but would you give us a little bit of an insight of whether some of those neural pathways of speech, is there a quote unquote place in the brain where speech lives, or are there multiple places? Can you shine a little bit of a light on that?
Absolutely. What I really need to say first as an introduction is that what I'm really interested into is what I call speech production in particular, because indeed there has been a lot of work in speech perception, auditory perception of speech vocalizations, and I could say that although there is, of course, a lot of ongoing work still, researchers of the auditory speech perception field have more or less reached some initial consensus about the brain pathways underlying speech perception, where we're making some of the initial steps now is in the realm of speech production, where we study in particular what's happening when we speak and not when we perceive speech. Another interesting thing that I need to say is that, well, uh, what we have studied even less is what is happening during speech learning. And there are, of course, ethical and other considerations that impede this because we would have to study babies, we would have to do this difficult infant work and analyzing the brain pathways and seeing really invasively what's happening in the brain while learning in infancy is impossible. So of course, there are several different ways, such as electroencephalography, that have managed to shed some light on it. But I just really want to highlight that my interest is on the production side, where there is, I would say, less advance compared to the perception side. I also want to say that when we're talking about speech, of course, this is more of an umbrella term that includes several mini processes. So, for example, even right now as I'm speaking, one thing that's happening is that I should remember, I should put my working memory into work in order for me to remember every single second what I've just said, and even my long-term memory into work so that I am able to pick the right word from, like my lexicon or, like semantic vocabulary. Of course, need to move several of my muscles, including laryngeal, mouth, lip, tongue, and other muscles to make this possible. I need to concatenate several different sounds. So, what I'm really mostly interested into is this really complex, rapid, and rhythmic control of all these muscles that make speech possible. And when it comes to your question specifically and the brain pathways that make this possible, I definitely think that there are several brain regions that make up this pathway. So there isn't, like one key brain area. Of course, our knowledge historically has been enlightened by very important studies that have focused on one area. We all know about the famous Broca's area study, but this was a result of the ability in this situation to have evidence from a person that had a specific lesion in one specific area. So, of course, all these studies are and have been extremely, extremely important and have led to an understanding that there is a pretty distributed pathway that makes us able to first speak overall and do all these different processes that I mentioned, but also in particular when it comes to the movements that are important for speaking. We're also talking about a distributed system. My research focuses mostly on the primary motor cortex, which generally has been understood as one of the centers of motor control. But this is mainly because we need to start from somewhere and we need to focus somewhere in order to advance in our work. But overall, I do, of course, see speech production, and all the sub processes as brain pathways of distributed brain areas.
Yeah, so thank you for that. And I understand this is a very difficult and complex topic to try to translate into layman's terms, right? Um, but what I'm hearing is that rather than thinking about one individual kind of isolated area in the brain, for instance, Broca's area, which is a specific region, a physical space, what I was hearing you say was pathways. So really what I'm envisioning is that there are different connections between, well, neighborhoods within the brain that have to work together or that work together in order for us to be able to produce a sound, to be able to hear a sound. But what we are speaking about today is really production of sound and
Mm-hmm.
speech. Mhm.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, kind of coming to this, and this is where some of our interests align. I mean, a lot of our interests align, but some of our conversations that you and I have been having outside of this one has been around how dance may support people who are living with a neurodegenerative condition, for instance, Parkinson's disease or some form of dementia, in particular, Alzheimer's disease. And you recently published a paper, and I'm picking it up so I can read the title properly, in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, titled Dancing Towards Speech Improvement, Repurposing Dance for Motor Speech Deficits in Neurodegenerative Diseases. And in this paper, you've outlined some of the ways in which dance can support speech, particularly within the context of neurodegenerative conditions. In the paper, you speak, among other things, to the process of learning dance, or I loved how you said body movement synchronization. I thought that was a really interesting and fun way of defining dance, and learning speech as working in parallel within our brain development. First, I just wanted to say, whenever I'm working with communities and we're talking about dance and brain health, I always ask people to define dance. So maybe before we proceed to my next question, which is how would you explain how dance and speech are interconnected in the brain? I'm curious, how would you define dance first? And
Mm-hmm.
then maybe we can talk about how they're connected in the brain with dance.
So when it comes to the definition of dance, I would first of all say that, as I said before, for the case of speech, I think that it is a very complex and kind of umbrella term behavior that encompasses several different behaviors within it. Several of the mini behaviors that I mentioned for speech would also apply for dance, such as working memory or long-term memory, for example, or motor control. My working definition when it comes to my scientific framework and how I study dance and I need to study dance in order to really understand better the motor control underlying mechanisms and kind of getting to the reason why I kind of defined it in the article as body movement synchronization is as so the definition I would say would be that dance would include the movements that are done synchronized to either an external or an internal beat music. So we are talking about this ability. There are several other movements, creative movements that I would categorize under dance, of course, and obviously there are so many incredible choreographies from professionals and non-professionals that are happening in a way that's clearly non-rhythmic. But for this specific hypothesis that I'm studying, what really was intriguing was that another species, in this case, the parrot, was able to do this thing where possibly evolutionarily dance and rhythmic behavior started from, which is to entrain our body movements to something else, to a beat in music, to a beat of, like a percussive beat that another individual was playing, etc., etc. Then, of course, dance accepted to become all these other things, which I also take to be dance. But for the case of this initial study of dancing, because we're really in the beginnings of this field, I think it makes some sense to start from like this really rhythm entrainment aspect of dance, because I think that it really makes sense to delineate our protocols and our understanding to have some initial progress. So I would focus it in this, like rhythmic synchronization of body movements, fashion, for the reasons that I explained. And so, which is the connection between speech and dance. So other than this evolutionary connection between, like what I said about parrots and humans and this overlap between these two abilities, there is already, I think, enough evidence to suggests that speech and dance are interconnected in humans. Departing from Erin Hannon's work, where developmentally she has shown that in childhood, from early stages till late childhood, the speech abilities, and we're talking about the phonological development, namely the accuracy with which children imitate and learn and speak using vocal sounds, right? So the development of this aspect with the development of the ability to perceive and train your hand tapping to a rhythm that you're perceiving, these two abilities go hand in hand until late childhood. So the better you are in one of the abilities, the better you will be in the other. The one can predict the other. I think this is very, very important. Of course, can we minimize and study dance through only hand tapping? Of course, dance is not only hand tapping, but this is one expression of it, and it is easy to be studied in the laboratory. So I think it makes sense to study it and to draw these conclusions. There are other interesting studies in people with tetraplegia, for example. So why are these studies important? Because researchers have been able, I mean, ethically speaking, to apply what we call electrode arrays on the brains of these individuals with tetraplegia in order to help them restore, for example, hand movements, right? And so what these arrays do is that they pick up signals from the brain at a neuronal resolution. Namely, they can show to us what's happening in every single neuron of the specific part where the array has been placed on. And so most of the research has focused in tetraplegia on restoring hand functions, right? And one of the experiments that I really loved from the Stavisky laboratory actually identified that while they had placed these arrays on what was traditionally thought of as being the hand area to restore hand movements, they actually realized that they were picking up also signals for when this person was speaking, for speech activity. And so this is one study, and there are several other studies that actually imply that although in the past we were thinking that our brains have a very discrete organization when it comes to which muscle type to control. Namely, in the past, understanding of, like the handbooks of anatomy by Painfield and colleagues, what was thought was that specifically the primary motor cortex is organized in a fashion where one area should only project and control leg muscles. Another area should only project and control laryngeal muscles for speech, for example. Another area, only hand muscles. What I'm finding also in my preliminary fMRI results is that actually this should not be the case because we're finding really significant overlaps between areas that are involved in speech laryngeal movements and areas that are involved in control hand rhythmic movements or leg rhythmic movements. So I think that this is the level of relationship that we get between speech and dance in development, in disease, and also, like in general in healthy adult individuals.
I mean, this is fascinating. My mind is swirling, and I think I'll probably want to come back to this conversation with you again after I've had a chance to process all of this, because this is fascinating to me. And I think as some from my putting my movement professional and dancer hat on, it makes sense to me how a movement and a focus on one area of our body actually inevitably ends up having a benefit on another part of our body. And I've never considered that from a neural circuit component as well, right? And I think that's also part of a limitation, I think, in our thinking about movement in general and how our brains are actually, in fact, connected to our body. So I don't think that we as a society think about that a lot, about this two-way street between body and mind and body, or brain and body in this case. So I really appreciate that. I also appreciated your definition of rhythm, and coming back to that definition of body movement synchronization, and really prioritizing beat or rhythmic patterns. And from a dance movement perspective, I think we can definitely look at rhythmic pattern in a very kind of even, identifiable beat, or even an irregular beat, where you're thinking about those time signatures, right? And thinking about the distance of silence between one intonation and another, right? That's one way of looking at beat patterns. But the when you put those together into one complex signature, they may not always appear as these really even regular beats. And I think that definitely translates in movement, right? Whether that is clapping or whether you extend that clapping into a larger movement, that beat signature, that rhythmic signature is there. Within dance, one of the definitions, I'm one of the practices that I incorporate when working with communities is Mettler-based group dance improvisation, which stems out of work by Barbara Mettler. And one of the definitions within that space is that movement is a combination of force, time, and space. Rhythm is a combination of force, time, and space. So it's not just sound is just time, right? That all of those have to work together. It's interesting to me how some of these movement practitioners who Barbara was born at the turn of the century, so she was really starting her work in her 30s. When we look back at some of these original, pioneers, or people who started and really influenced a lot of the work that we now see influencing dance movement therapy, dance education, creative dance that's used in childhood development, as well as collaborative group dance improvisations, the movement originators of those lexicons for us, really were thinking about this and recognizing this in what they saw and perceived. So it's fascinating to me now in the 21st century that we're finding ways to corroborate some of the observations that they had with the wonderful work that you're doing. And I hope that we'll continue to have more of these conversations and really discover this minutia, these nuances. So I really appreciate you articulating that for us today.
And to add to this conversation, when I talk about rhythmicity, there is a specific feature of rhythmicity that I'm talking about, which is this unique ability that has been identified in humans and primates, which is the negative asynchrony before the beat. Namely, when we listen to a beat, if we want to entrain any muscle movement to these beats, such as clapping, what we do is that we actually clap some milliseconds before the actual beat falls. So we have this expectation of what is going to come. And what we do is what we call this. So we have this asynchrony. We're not fully synchronized with the beat ever. And we do this in a negative fashion. Namely, we start somewhat before the beat falls. Negative here is not used with a bad connotation, just to mean that there is a negative timing compared to the zero timing, let's say, when the beat falls. What other species do, because some other species like chimpanzees, for example, have shown abilities to entrain to a beat, but in a positive asynchrony fashion. Namely, they first hear the beat and they respond to the beat some milliseconds afterwards. So I think that this, and of course we're talking about, like time and space and all these other notions that you talked about, but I think that what is really distinctive and important is this expectation, right? That makes us start the move much before the beat is about to fall. And this is really very important because it's not happening as a response to something. It's happening as an expectation. We have ingrained in our brains a system that brings this kind of motivation signal as an expectation instead of as a reward after the beat has fallen. So I think that that's really incredible. That's really rare. And we have not really understood what's happening in the brain while we're doing this. So that's why I think it's really important to start from trying to understand this, and of course that the brain pathways of this behavior and this kind of rare ability to expect something that's going to come in the auditory dance realm.
I mean, one of the things that's coming to mind, I've seen multiple examples of this in classes that I've been a part of with dance, where I've been the participant with groups that I've facilitated. I think a lot of times when we think about the synchrony, when I think this is where anticipation, I think almost, and this is me just hypothesizing here, but I would anticipate that the anticipation actually is a requirement of that synchrony, for that synchrony to be perceived as synchrony. What we're actually doing is that we are anticipating, even though, in dance, we say in dance, do not anticipate, right? But really, and this, we speak about relaxing the body. But really, I think what's happening is that when we relax, we are actually anticipating. But what's coming to mind is an example of Bobby McFerrin. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this musician, who I think this was like a viral video of him working with an audience, physically creating a musical scale on stage and creating a music and sound and movement pattern that the entire audience anticipated exactly what was going to happen next. And then he stopped and they continued in kind. So it's absolutely amazing. I mean, we look at this as magic, but I guess maybe that's where we should go, is how can you illuminate some of those mechanisms for us a little bit more, or maybe some of the questions that you're asking in seeking to illuminate these mechanisms.
Right. And I think that what you're tapping into is how is it possible that, like all this audience knew all of this? And what's I think unfair and sad is that we don't take ourselves humans to be quote unquote natural dancers. And this is really an important aspect of my science, which is to really spread the knowledge about humans being born endowed with the ability to dance. Now, of course, there are different gradients and in this ability, in the same way that there are different gradients in the ability to speak. We're all able to speak. We come with this ability. Of course, there are cases of deficits or disorders, but initially humans come to life with the ability to learn how to speak. And speech is one of these abilities that has become so entrenched in our social communication that we all feel that we just should learn how to speak, and our parents speak to us, and this is what we do, and it's important afterwards for our development, for our education, for our work life, depending on the culture where we are finding ourselves in. And then for dance, although this is a behavior that we come prepared to unfold and develop, we don't see, at least, like in the Western culture, we don't see this behavior being just a necessary part that we should learn and develop and unfold. It's something that just happens as a hobby. It's sometimes only kept for, like some people who can do it very well. People are many times shy to dance, and this is understandable in this social and cultural context where you're expected to do it well. So I think that this is another thing, which is that if we go to a concert like the one that you mentioned, and we do all of these things, and we clap in time, and we sing in time in the way that the singer asks us to, and if we all sing and dance happy birthday to you or all these other like cultural songs that we have, and we do so in a way that is kind of shared and expected, this really proves the point that we are born to, all of us, be dancers, and maybe like we should reorient or kind of imbue some new understanding into why we're not just dancing more anyway. So I think that one of your thoughts really brought me to this point. And then what are we doing to really understand that? Well, in the case of for example, speech deficits in neurodegenerative diseases, right? So in neurodegenerative diseases such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, interestingly, speech deficits have been overlooked. So in Alzheimer's, people talk more about, like the memory and cognitive decline. In Parkinson's, people are more interested in understanding or just notice very easily the whole body motor deficits, but not the motor deficits that have to do with the speech. So what I'm doing in my research is basically say, well, dance training, dance-based interventions have already shown a whole lot, have really shown great significant evidence about how they're really able to improve several behaviors. Let's say in Parkinson's, in the motor realm, bradykinesia, gait freezing, stance, balance have some great improvements after only some weeks of dancing. So my thinking was, well, what if we repurpose? What if we study whether we can repurpose this already existing successful dance-based training to also test its effects on another speech or on another motor realm, being that of speech. And so, of course, this is one huge question at a behavioral level, namely, would your speech get better by dancing if, in the case, for example, of neurodegenerative diseases that include, like speech deficits. And then at the level of the brain, that really interests me, if we find such improvement in the speech, which are these brain regions, brain pathways that support this change, that support this improvement? What changes in the brain? So one of these first experiments that I'm running in collaboration with Madeleine Hackney at Emory University is that we are running some clinical trials where we have people with Parkinson's disease undergo dance training for 12 weeks, and we test through fMRI how different brain regions connect before and after the experiment is over. And we want to see whether any connections got increased or decreased, whether we see any strengthening or any decrease in these connections. So we're having some very interesting preliminary results targeting specifically these areas that control both hand and laryngeal movements. And what I understand from this is that indeed, when you're moving your hands, right, or your legs while dancing, in this case, we're doing a tango-based training. So when you're moving your arms and legs rhythmically with a partner, et cetera, you might actually unwillingly, right, be also activating areas that in other contexts control laryngeal muscles. So something that you do in a dancey way, namely moving your arms in a rhythmic fashion, might actually exercise as a byproduct these same brain areas that in other contexts control better after this exercise your laryngeal muscles. So that's where our research is at. Of course, there is a lot of a way ahead, but we're getting into something that would really be unthought of maybe a couple of years ago. So I'm really happy that we're able to run these experiments first, and that there are people and collaborators who believe in them and support them.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I have a lot of questions, but I first wanted to come back to what you said, and amplify it. You said that humans are born and endowed with the ability to dance.
Mhm.
And I want to thank you for saying this. And I think this is definitely central to my vision, what has driven me in my work. And I think it's a huge shortcoming and limitation for our societies, especially Western societies, that we have somehow allowed ourselves to move away from something that has always been a part of human cultures and human existence, which is expressing through movement. Um, I know I don't want to take shortcuts here, but I know that we often speak about dance as a language, as a source of expression. And it excites me to hear. I don't want to be kind of reductive here, but it does excite me that in some way, what you're uncovering through your work is that, in fact, this is actually quite true. And may actually be more literal than we have initially anticipated. But I also love that you're recognizing that limitation. And I like to lean into this when I ask people when they say, well, I can't dance, or, well, I'm not a dancer. But we see that with other novel experiences that are introduced, people are more willing and to embrace them and to try them at any time in their life. I tend to work with older persons, people living with a neurodegenerative condition. And especially with that, there is this idea that only youth or young persons can engage and begin an exploration with dance or a relationship with dance, which I think is not right. We're really limiting ourselves. And my experience has been that, contrary to what those people might have initially thought, that they are pleasantly surprised when they start to embrace their agency within this expressive form. And I think a big part of this is allowing ourselves to change these narratives and the visibility of dancers at various ages, not only within a professional realm, which is definitely one part of this genre, but really within what you were saying, um, social events in response and in engagement with performances that in cultural events that we were participating in, and also just as a source of our internal individual expression and joy. Um, and really, I welcome people to expand their definition of dance to encompass this. I thank you so much for saying that. You said something that I kind of brought in my head that we are all essentially born to dance. So I appreciate that you're giving us more reason to try it out. Um, and you spoke and thank you so much to the work that you're doing with Dr. Hackney. I've been following Dr. Hackney's work for years. She is one of the reasons why the field of dance and brain health even exists. So, huge
Exactly.
thank you. I've never met her, but I follow her work and I really appreciate her work. And I'm so delighted that you're working together on this. We don't have a lot of time, so maybe another time we can come connect and speak a little bit more about the connection with this work and Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia, because again, that I think would be a really rich topic that we maybe don't have time for today. Um, but I guess maybe I'd like to finish with just a couple more questions. The first one, thinking about some of the next steps, which I think you sort of mentioned, but maybe more a little bit more of dreaming. What do you envision for the future of dance and brain health, or around this work within dance and neuroscience?
Yeah, I think more conceptually or more culturally speaking, I envision that dance and brain health or dance in brain health wouldn't be the odd one out. Being in departments of, like neuroscience or in institutes like the Rockefeller University, where people are doing what we would call, like quote unquote hardcore neuroscience. Unfortunately, at least prima facie, um, neuroscience of dance or dance in clinical work are not considered are not considered part of this hardcore neuroscience. They are considered artistic, hence not so serious. It's not like studying olfactory processing or auditory processing, which are real behaviors. We're talking about something that has not really been recognized as a complex behavior in the way that speech has. And that's super interesting because we're talking about scientists, neuroscientists, and people, like who understand the brain and behavior in the best way possible. So how could we be talking before about the rest of humanity understanding that we are endowed with the ability to dance and actually doing so, when even the experts do not actively really recognize this ability as just a very complex sensory motor and other aspects ability that we humans are able to do, and that really deserves to be studied. So I think what I envision and what I hope for is that our science and also, like a kind of a shift in the understanding and the framework and the philosophy will lead us and the field as not being the odd one out, as just being, like neuroscientists and scientists and researchers just studying something else, just one more thing. And I think that this like I'm really hoping towards kind of this acceptance, and I'm working hard for it. I also hope that we will get the chance after these like first like big studies about the brain effects of dance and disorders like or diseases like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's disease. I'm really hoping that we will be able to tap into the brain health benefits of dance in an array of different brain disorders, be it developmental or neurodegenerative or other disorders. We're starting now a study about the role of dance in maternal depression, specifically postpartum depression. These are extremely important conditions that we should consider as well, and see how dance differently or similarly applies to several different aspects of human life. I'm also envisioning that in the future, after these, like first big important studies that will hopefully kind of open up and break ground in the field, that we will be able to really play around with protocol duration. So what is a good duration for a dance training protocol? We're working a lot with like 12 weeks, 8 weeks, some months. What is really a good sweet spot, or what are many good sweet spots around the different disorders? Of course, I would also consider several different techniques and combinations of different techniques within one study, like fMRI, magnetoencephalography, electroencephalography. All of these different techniques kind of shed light on different aspects of brain activity, brain connectivity, and I think we would really benefit from combination of them. So this is what I'm really looking forward to in the field.
Oh, thank you. I'm delighted that you are this champion, this really strong voice and beacon for this work. Thank you for leading this. I'm so grateful that we connected. I think I reached out to you on LinkedIn. I think that's how we connected. I'm so grateful that you responded, and I really hope and look forward to continuing to witness and celebrate the amazing work that you're doing, and hoping that there are ways that we can collaborate, and that others who are hearing this also really listen to some of the things that you're proposing, because we need to work together. And there are a lot of voices and experts within both the field of dance, within the field of applied dance practice, the individuals in the community who I think have practiced and worked in dance, whether they're people living with dementia, people living with Parkinson's, who can speak to some of the impact and can help drive some future research. And then also, of course, many expert clinicians and neuroscientists who could really offer a lot of perspective. If we all find more ways and normalize this interconnectedness, I think society will really benefit. Um, I guess the one final question I have for you, aside from if you have any final thoughts, is there, I'm thinking of what way, I want to say magical moment, but is there an experience with dance, either that you've witnessed or that you've experienced, that you would like to share with us in closing?
Um, I think that what comes to my mind first is the most recent dancing experience that I had in public, namely performing. And it was in the context of an arts and health symposium for the United Nations General Assembly in September, that was co-organized, among others, by the World Health Organization and the Jamil Arts and Health Lab, where I performed flamenco, actually flamenco jazz, with some really important musicians. And one of the interesting technologies that we showcased there was that I, as a dancer and a musician and a percussionist, were wearing electroencephalography caps that we're showing to the public um, our brain activity while dancing and while playing a musical instrument. And I have to say that I think that this is maybe, if not the first, I think it's the first, but one of the first times that this is happening in scientific history, like seeing what's happening in the brain of a dancer and a musician together. And what I have to say is that I so much enjoyed the performance. So like in the making, while this was happening, I just really enjoyed it fully. Like I cannot say we are so critical of ourselves as artists and dancers, of course. And I can say that I'm really happy to have kind of, at least in this performance, I don't know how the future one will be, to have reached this point where I just enjoyed, and I'm really kind of use the word proud. I'm really not keen on using this word, but I'm really proud that I was able to really be, like a part of a communal, like group music and movement making. And I was just, like hugely enjoying it. And there were really greatly important people for arts and health in the room. And I felt really emotional when I saw them at the very end kind of give a standing ovation to this. I felt really emotional. I think that if they could see me from close up, they would see that I was about to tear up a lot. So I think that this was, like one of the recent experiences of dance and performance, and actually sharing it with the people of dance, brain health, neuroscience, science policy, dance therapists, etc. All these people that are so important for all these different reasons. Most of the times when I dance, it is to very different audiences. So what was extremely unique in this more recent performance was, I think, the audience. And I think that, of course, maybe they were one of the reasons why I so much enjoyed it, because I felt there was mutual understanding about what was happening there.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you for being an ambassador of dance in such an important forum. And I thank you for sharing how deeply that touched you. And I think when we allow ourselves to really be present in that moment, I think we're very open to our own feelings, but also receiving probably some of the awe that you manifested for the people who were there. So I'm really
Exactly.
glad that you were so generous in sharing that alongside these musicians, but also that this audience was so receptive to to bear witness to that. And I'm just reminded very briefly, and this is a gross oversimplification of Dr. Emily Cross's work, but a lot of her work speaks about the fact to when we observe and witness dance that we are actually essentially dancing inside and internally as well. So in a way, what I appreciate about bringing dance into these quote unquote unexpected forums that tend to be primarily conversational, with spoken word rather than with an embodied expression, I think that in so doing, you are actually creating and seeding an experience of that in their own bodies, and their whole brain body connections. And I think we need to do more of that. And that might actually help reshape some of those issues that we've identified in this conversation, that more of us aren't dancing,
Of
because
course.
we have segregated it to only certain areas where we experience and engage with it, both as performers as well as witnesses and audience members.
I absolutely agree. And I think that we are really getting into very important topics that, like I'm not an expert in, but I can certainly talk by experience, which is that possibly one of the reasons why we don't, like dance so much in our culture, is because it is impossible to not be vulnerable while dancing. With other behaviors like speech, maybe you can hide vulnerability more easily. With dancing, I think it is close to impossible. So I think that, like one last message could be, uh, let's go for more vulnerability, and it might actually help. And dancing is one, like free ticket to get that. And whenever, like I've been more vulnerable to people, to conversations, to friends, dancing anyhow, this, like turns things better than worse. So I believe that we should use this. We should use this behavior that just buys vulnerability for free, and practice it. And that would be my last message.
Thank you so much, Constantina. I completely agree with you. It takes a lot of courage to do it, but the reward is definitely worth it. And I thank you for being this bright light and on this path, and really lighting this path forward for so many. And thank you also for joining this inaugural episode of Dancing into Brain Health.
Congratulations. I really hope it goes well and that listeners enjoy. Thank you for doing this for the field. It is absolutely important.
This episode of Dancing into Brain Health was edited and produced by me, Magda Kaczmarska, and Hilary Brown-Istrefi. The music for this show was composed and recorded by Venegoni. Show notes, links, and resources from today's episode can be found on the Dancing into Brain Health page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.